The following statements in this video are based on opinion and is unscripted. If you feel we are wrong or left anything out, please leave us your opinion in the comments. Obviously, it is up to the viewer what old tech still holds up by their standards. Thank you for your time and hope you enjoy. Hello my fellow gaming nuts and thanks for tuning in. Today we are here with my good friend Daniel May. And today we're talking about one of my favorite childhood consoles, the Super Nintendo. Now, the reason why we're talking about, I forgot to mention that this is an old tech talk episode. The reason why we're doing this episode because we still feel that the Super Nintendo holds up even on like a 50-inch television. As you will clearly see, the quality of the Super Nintendo still holds up even on a yellow, red, and white plug-in. You could get component cables for it, so you can get even better, and I think that there's another one called SCART, which is another type of plug-in. I don't know a whole about SCART plugins.
Yeah, I don't really know about that
either. I don't know. I've heard about it. I've heard some people say that it's better, but I honestly don't know. You know, but I'll look into it more if I ever do get a Super Nintendo, which I probably will since I'm doing a little collection thing for myself. We'll talk about that at another time. So let's talk about some of the best games that's on the Super Nintendo. Well, you go ahead. We already know some of them.
Hands down, Super Mario World was one of the best games ever made for the Super Nintendo.
Right?
It was actually released in 1990, for crying out loud. That was the peak of technology for the late 80s even.
Right?
The fact that this game still stands up to today's standards is phenomenal. The game came out when I was 2 years old, and everyone has played it, everyone knows the game. Not a person has ever been like, what's Super Mario World? It's a phenomenal game, and for its time, the graphics were groundbreaking. In 1990, we were seeing things that were beyond pixelated. If you play Super Mario World on a 20-inch screen or on a Super Nintendo, there's no pixelation at all. If you blow it up to something like this giant 55-inch screen we have, you have slight pixelation. That is phenomenal for anything from the 90s.
Frankly, it's not that bad, though. It
still
looks
not horrible. Yeah.
Oh, no, I've seen way worse pixelation than this. This is actually pretty good for a yellow, red, and white plug-in.
Exactly. That's one of the most phenomenal games. The most iconic games next to that is Mortal Kombat. I also have Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Not to be confused with Street Fighter 2, which was lacking some of the special features and lacking some of the higher definition graphics.
Well, I also want to point out, since we're talking about the Mortal Kombat games, like, in my book, the Super Nintendo versions of Mortal Kombat, if you had the console versions, before the arcade ports that came out for current consoles today, the Super Nintendo version was way better than the Sega version.
It was phenomenal. The Super Nintendo version had better graphics, the controls were better even. The Sega controls were a little iffy and weird.
Right? You only had like 3 buttons to work with.
Yeah, they were harder to play because of this.
I just remembered that, okay, what we just said, that the Super Nintendo versions were better, but the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat 1 on the Nintendo, the downside of that was that there was no blood and gore for the first one.
They didn't introduce the blood until the second one, and the second one kind of had a little bit of blood, but not really. And the third one had a lot more blood, but you didn't see it as much as unless you had the Ultimate Edition of 3.
I disagree. I think that Mortal Kombat 2 on Super Nintendo, like even on Super Nintendo, had a pretty good, like had a lot of blood. But the arcade version's the best. The arcade versions of 1, 2, and 3, the best.
Hands down.
Yeah. But if you're a collector and you want to collect for the Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, since we're talking about Mortal Kombat, one of my favorite subjects, if we're talking about Mortal Kombat 3, definitely get the Ultimate MK3 because the regular version does not have as many characters.
It's not as fun. You're missing characters. You actually have a few less specialty moves too. Some of the fatalities are not there.
Right.
I myself tried to find Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate Edition, but I couldn't, so I settled for Mortal Kombat 3. Because I went on a quest to collect all 3 of them because they were released on the Super Nintendo, and it's my favorite console. The Super Nintendo stands up today because it has no cooling system. How is it still functioning? That's mind-blowing. Some people I know have had their original Super Nintendo since 1995 and still have it in their household and still use it occasionally today.
Well, before, like, what, the game, like, did the N64 have a fan on it?
The N64 has a little built-in internal fan.
Okay, so let's say before the N64. Most of the Nintendo consoles, including the original Nintendo, which actually, Some of the games on the original Nintendo still hold up too.
Look at all the Legend of Zelda games on the original Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
I have the very first one on my Wii that I downloaded from the Wii store. Phenomenal game. It's so much funner to play on the Wii and Wii U, since I have a Wii U, because you don't have any lag. You don't have any freezing. It's phenomenal for that fact. You don't have to worry about your console overheating anymore, because that was kind of a side effect of the regular Nintendo.
Was it?
Yeah.
The regular Nintendo overheated?
It overheated all the time, actually.
What?
Yeah, if you played games for like 8-9 hours, you would get freezing and laggy and have to shut off your...
Holy shit, really?
Yeah, my dad constantly hated that. Like, he'd just sit there on his day off and play Legend of Zelda until his thumbs hurt.
Damn. Wow. So, going back to the Super Nintendo, like, this does include the regular Nintendo too. We've been talking about how the Nintendos had, like, they yellowed with time. Yeah. Like, the casing yellowed with time.
That was due to faulty plastic.
Yeah, I heard about that. It was a big thing during the 80s and 90s, was really bad plastic.
Well, that tended to happen, though. Everything I've read about that stated that a lot of people originally left their Super Nintendos and regular Nintendos in front of windows, in front of sunlight. So that happened from sunlight exposure.
What?
Yeah, because, back then, just huge vanity windows were, like, in the main living rooms of most buildings.
Well, I thought it just yellowed with time, period.
It's a bit of both. It's the sunlight and the fact that now the plastic is going on almost 30 years old.
Is it, like, the chemical in the plastic?
I think it has something to do with whatever Nintendo manufactured the plastic. There are ways to fix the yellowing of the plastic, but that's something you can, research on your own.
Yeah? Well, yeah, there is YouTube tutorials. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you. I nearly forgot. There are YouTube tutorials on how to actually undo the yellowing process of the plastic and even make it live longer. Some of my friends' methods are a little different from those videos. Why don't you go ahead and tell them what your suggestion is for it?
Well, a friend of mine, read online that if you use hydrogen peroxide and, kind of dab it on there and rub it around with a cotton ball, it will reverse the yellowing effect. And he tried it and it didn't work at all, so he tried lemon juice instead, and it brought it back to life and made it look better than what it originally looked.
Wow, that's something I never thought about trying, is lemon juice. I actually have some lemon juice.
Well, the only side effect of that is it's a lot more acidic than peroxide, and that would be the only downside, is to worry about using too much or not mixing it with a little bit of water, maybe.
I just hear that the hydrogen peroxide method is the more popular method, though.
No. Just because something's more popular doesn't mean it works better.
Now that we're talking about the Super Nintendo, I want to briefly talk about the Nintendo that almost happened. The Nintendo that was between the Super and the N64 was when Sony and Nintendo partnered up. Someone found it recently and they're putting it in a museum or something like that. Google it. Were they going to call it the PlayStation before Sony called it PlayStation?
I think that was going to be its original name, but once again, we're not too sure on that.
We're not too sure. I'll probably post an image and a few facts about it on this video.
In the end, the deal kind of fell through and it wasn't birthed at all, which we would have personally loved to see Sony and Nintendo joined together. That probably would have been a titan that we would have heard about today and probably still be playing.
Right, but then again, if that happened, Sony and Nintendo wouldn't be where they're at today.
True, we probably wouldn't see either one of them. They probably would have merged into some evil corporation and we would have gotten crappier games.
But that's a 50-50 gamble. It would have fell one way or another. It could have been a powerhouse, it could have been super awesome, or it could have been really shitty, and fucking the Sega Dreamcast would have lived on. Sega would have kept going, probably.
Side note, Nintendo has kind of made a few wrong decisions here and there, but the Super Nintendo was not one of them. It was the best decision they ever made. It was the best hardware that they've made to date, if you ask me.
But if you are a collector, and this is what we've been trying to say throughout the whole video, if you are a collector and you're worried that it might not hold up on an HD television, rest assured it does.
It does.
Another thing I want to bring up during this video, want to talk about the in Japan, the Nintendo is actually not called the Nintendo. This is really weird. The company Nintendo called their console something else in Japan before it came to America. In Japan, the original Nintendo was called the Famicom. The design of the Famicom it looks better.
It's so much cooler. It looks
it's so much better.
It looks so much more futuristic.
Yeah, and I saw Angry Video Game Nerd play there's plugins for the Famicom. There's a floppy disk one.
Yeah.
It's super weird.
It's a weird complication.
But it looks so much better. The cartridges for the Famicom were way better than what we got in America.
Yeah, well, whenever I go on eBay to try to hunt down Super Mario World or Donkey Kong Country, they always pop up with the Japanese cartridge, and the Japanese cartridge will not fit in ours. But they look more like a Nintendo 64 cartridge. They're so weird. They're smoother. They're rounder.
Yeah.
They look like the next gen when we look like we have the prototype.
Right. Exactly. And if you crack them open, the chips look, from what I've seen, they look identical.
The circuitry is a little bit different, but they look exactly the same.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
It looks like they spend a little more time carefully soldering it better.
Then what? I'm just wondering why they did that when they brought it to America.
Well, it could have been a money factor. It could have been, so many yens converted to American currency was just so much that they had to cut down here and there.
So you're saying when it came to America, they had to make a cheaper model instead of selling the exact same model?
They probably had to, yeah. They probably... and I know that America's Nintendo branch was pretty much left on its own. Like, Japan really didn't go, here's what you have to do.
I just now remembered this about the old Nintendo, and this seems a little awkward talking about this in the middle of the film, but I want to bring it up. Do you remember when, before Nintendo was a gaming company, they actually had Nintendo collect, cards?
They were a card company. They originally were a base card company and then became a trading card company. So it's completely weird and mind-boggling that they went from cards to a gaming console.
Well, thank God they did, because...
Thank God. History was born. Whatever CEO went, hey guys, we need to put down these trading cards and move into the future with this gaming console idea. Phenomenal. That CEO deserves to get, I don't know, more money than he ever made, and I hope to God his tombstone says, here lies the coolest fucker ever.
Alright, so we talked about the Famicom and the Famicom, Super Famicom. Did I mention the Super Famicom?
The Super Famicom is actually the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, it is. It's a better designing looking one in Japan, so that makes it another version.
It looks phenomenal. Today, I brought over my Super Nintendo, which is actually the second generation Super Nintendo.
Which we'll show you a little bit of.
But it's the second generation Super Nintendo. Most people who come over to my house and see my Super Nintendo are like, what the hell is that? Everyone who grew up in the 90s had only seen the big square one, the big hulking square one.
Right,
so whenever anyone comes over to my house and they see my game cartridge plugged into this device, they're like, what is that? And I'm like, it's the Super Nintendo. And they're like, I've never seen that. And then I get to tell them that it's the late 90s model, because it was. It was done in the late 90s, pretty much towards the end of the Super Nintendo era. This generation of Super Nintendo actually doesn't even have the coaxial cable, which is kind of weird, because the big square one that everyone knows and everyone's iconic with had the coaxial cable.
Well, I think that I think it was a good idea to get rid of the coaxial, because towards the end of the 90s, no one, people were leaning more towards DVDs, and people who had VHS at this point didn't really, they already had their coaxial plugged in, so even if they were still using coaxial, they eventually used the yellow, red, and white plugins no matter what.
If you did only go coaxial, you had to get splitters, so your VHS would have to be hooked up to the TV as well as your cable box, so things just got weird and complicated.
Screw that noise.
So this makes me wish that I brought over Super Mario All-Stars, because I have Super Mario All-Stars. It cost me $35 at a secondhand store.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just thinking about this. Did you know that there's a Super Mario World Plus All-Stars? Or All-Stars Plus Super Mario World?
Yeah, I've seen it.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay, well now you guys know. According to the Angry Video Game Nerd, at the end of the day, the Super Nintendo did win the 16-bit wars?
Yes.
That's what it was.
Hands down.
So let's get back to the games before we wrap this video up. One of the other games besides Super Mario World, because we kept talking about Super Mario World, Mario's the shit, okay? So
most iconic video game ever.
Right.
A 3-year-old today goes, oh my god, look, it's Mario.
Even the old Nintendo Mario is still good. That's the one that holds up the most, the original Nintendo. Okay, so back to the games at hand. Let's talk about some of the games real fast. These aren't reviews. These are just, just talking about some of our favorite games from Super Nintendo. Here we have Super Street Fighter Turbo.
2 Turbo.
True Turbo, huh? Oh, alright, let's see.
Yep. Yeah, I actually found images of the first Street Fighter's game, and
yeah.
It was sad. It was sad.
Oh, Angry Video Game Nerd touched upon it. He actually found out that it actually was a PC game in Japan.
Yeah, it was sad.
It was really bad. Yeah, it was not even called PC back then. That was Commodore.
Yes,
the
the Commodore
Commodore
64.
Oh god.
A dinosaur. Google Commodore 64.
Right? This is why we have old tech talk, because there's some old consoles that are just ancient.
My girlfriend's dad was telling me about when he was able to upgrade his Commodore 64 to 16 kilobytes of RAM.
Mm-hmm.
What's a kilobyte? Google a kilobyte.
I'm sure most of the audience hopefully will know the difference between their bytes if they have a hard drive. So anyway, we're talking about Super Street Fighter. So how many versions of Super Street Fighter 2 were there? Like, Street Fighter 2 were there?
I personally have seen the arcade version, which is a little bit different. There's not as many specialty moves. Then there's the console version, which was Street Fighter 2. And then towards the end of the 90s, they did Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And the graphics are a little bit better. They're not a whole lot better. They didn't introduce any new characters. Pretty much, it was just a gimmick to sell the game better. They didn't, like, redesign the game. It was pretty much, hey kids, now there's this better version.
I know. There's so many versions of Street Fighter today. There was, like, Mega Ultra Street Fighter 4! Or Ultra Mega who gives a shit on a stick.
The Street Fighter series, they kind of, because it came out around the same time as Mortal Kombat, but they wanted to distinguish themselves from Mortal Kombat, although it's pretty much a similar game. You're both components fighting other people, but you're not in a tournament. Completely different than Mortal Kombat.
No,
it's random people on a street that you're fighting against, not we are doing this for the sake of saving our universe, our realm.
It does have a story. It's just a little wackier, in my opinion. The story in Street Fighter is a lot wackier, and the graphics to date still remains very cartoony as compared to Mortal Kombat.
But that's what I love about the Street Fighter series, though. If you look at Street Fighter 5, it's very iconic cartoon, which I love that. That was so cool that they kept with that style. The newest game's pretty fun and exciting, but nothing compares to having the roots of the classic. You can't say, oh my god, this was the best game ever. I actually was at a friend's house, and this 16-year-old was asking me if I ever played the first Donkey Kong game, because he was playing Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii. And I was like, yeah, you know, it was a fun game, it was pretty difficult. And he was like, yeah, how'd you like it on 64? I almost cried. I almost cried that this kid had only thought that the first Donkey Kong Country game was released on Nintendo 64. My heart bled for this kid's lack of knowledge. I guess, you know, it comes, so if you're younger, you might not have researched any older games, you might have only played what you've been around and not thought about it, honestly. You know, if I handed you Final Fantasy 13, would you ever be like, huh, I wonder what the other 12 games before this were like? I don't know if you would.
Well, that's Donkey Kong Country. We just went from Street Fighter to Donkey Kong because you just switched gears. That when we were talking about Street Fighter, like the reason why I like Mortal Kombat, like Street Fighter is known for like its intense combos and the insane moves. I could never do any of them. I only know how to do like Blanca's shock thing. That's all I knew how to do.
Which is actually a game end-all, though. If you can do Blanca's shock, you can pretty much kill almost everyone in the game.
I know, you could just shock.
You can shock the hell out of everyone and just beat the whole game.
It looked like he was taking a shit. Like, you're like, yes.
Very concentrated.
Let's see, what other games can we talk about? Like Donkey Kong Country 1 through 3. We talked a little bit about them.
The Mega Man series did come out on...
Oh yeah, the Mega Man games.
Unfortunately, they made 1 billion Mega Man games in the 90s for the Super Nintendo, so...
No, that was like 6, or 4 or 6.
Ridiculous amount of numbers in a game series for a 10-year period. Just saying.
There's third-party companies out there right now still making Super Nintendos, by the way.
Well, the actual license or trademark license for the Super Nintendo expired.
Really?
So, yeah. So there's other companies that are. That's why you see in stores the things that play Super Nintendo, Sega, and so forth and so on. They can only do that because the license expired, and so it's you know, it's free game now.
I thought it only expired for the original Nintendo. Where'd you hear this?
There's several consoles now that you can buy in stores that play Super Nintendo and back.
Yeah.
It plays Super Nintendo and Sega.
That's something to keep in mind, by the way. And because it's such an older system, and if you do emulate on computer, once again, I say this in almost all my videos when I talk about older games, that if you are emulating on your computer, don't emulate games you don't physically own. Having said that, usually emulation is a really good choice, and the quality turns up really good for Super Nintendo as opposed to later emulators. I emulate with PS1 games, and I still get problems like graphical glitches and whatnot. They're not that big of a deal. They're nothing to cry home about, but it is a thing. It does result in sharper quality if you emulate on a computer because you got more horsepower on a gaming computer. Third-party companies are still making Nintendo consoles. It is an option. They're also making third-party controllers. So if you are a collector and you do have one of the original Super Nintendos, including the very last one like my friend Daniel here has, you can still get an affordable third-party controller for like $10.
That is wireless too. They
have a wireless one!
The third-party companies are making wireless ones, which is amazing because this cord is just under 10 feet. It's not... You know, we can barely reach the couch that we're sitting on with this thing. Like, as you can see, like, it's stretching.
It's like... Yeah, don't they have like extenders for that?
You can get extenders too. I remember back when I was a kid back in the 90s that my cousin or someone had an extender, so he had like 16 feet versus the normal 10.
I'll have to look into that. We got no confirmation about if there's any about quality extenders here. I don't know anything about that, and I don't think Daniel here does.
All I remember is he had like one extender, so he could play on his couch, and we had to sit in front of him on the floor.
Well, I think this was a successful Old Tech Talk. I'm glad that you came with me, Daniel. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to doing more with you in the future.
You too.
Anyway, I'm glad that we did this. I'm glad that you guys watched this video. If you guys like this video, please leave a like. If you guys want to see more, please subscribe. If you guys have any suggestions or something we left out during this Old Tech Talk, please leave a comment below. Well, anyway, I'm the MK Nut. This is Daniel May. He doesn't have a Twitter or YouTube or anything yet. We'll see. Anyway, I'm MK Nut. You guys take care. Bye.
Peace.